Okay, I'm starting the recording, and then
That's good.
Okay, and handing over the reins to you, Victor, the presentation reins, and now you can take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you for participating in this webinar. I do want to mention that, we have been going right now through some crises. So many of this information you might already be doing. So just serve like a checklist to see if you're doing things correctly, and maybe you might notice some items that you need to add to your plan. So the class's name is called Reducing the Impact of Catastrophic Threats, Crisis Management for Public Entities. There's not a lot of notes on the slides, but like Lee mentioned, there's a handout of the presentation that I'm talking about, which will have all the talking points there for you. But if you can also take notes, please ask questions, so make it more interesting, and participate to make it more interesting for everybody. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll go to the next slide. Lee, I don't see this. Let me see. Okay. Got it. Okay. These are the presentation objectives: is to know and understand the three phases of a crisis. Then we're going to identify catastrophic threats that can impact your public entity. And then we're going to analyze the impact of these catastrophic threats. We're going to review and learn the 5 steps of the crisis management process. Also, we're going to know and you're going to discuss some of the components for each of the steps of the crisis management process. We're going to identify prevention techniques used before, during, and after a crisis. And we're going to have a practice exercise to practice the planning step number 1. Like I said, if we don't have the form, we can just kind of go over the form and you can work on this exercise later on. As you know, we've had a history of crisis. As we started, and you can remember, with hurricanes back when Rita, Katrina, and Harvey, and they did a lot of physical damage to these. Mainly was a lot of physical damage, and some lives were lost during this time also. Then we've had the crisis of active shooters. We've had so many killings, starting the most recent in El Paso, when there were some shootings at the Walmart. We had the Midland, Odessa incident, not too long ago in 2019. So from the active shooter, we were all continuing. Then we started getting hit with a bunch of cyber attacks in the last 2 to 3 years. And big companies were breached, and information for millions of people were taken, and without people even knowing that these things were done. They didn't find out till months later, and sometimes weeks later, And then finally, we've gone through one big crisis, is a pandemic, and we've had some, it was before the Ebola, and we've had the H1N1. So we've had these type of crises before, but never as prevalent as today. Also, because we've gone through these, we've learned to lessen the impact of these crises. For example, we have better courthouse security and been training at different courthouses on this topic to make the courthouse and employees safer. Also, they passed some mandatory cyber security training for all county employees that are on the computer to lessen the impact of these types of crises. So we've learned some things from going through these crises. Okay, crisis management. And that is the definition of a crisis. The main thing here, a crisis is going to be a catastrophic loss that's going to stop you from being able to do your daily operations. You're not going to be able to continue your operation. And it's going to affect everybody, a lot of employees. And crisis management really, it's an all hazards plan, and it's a planned process that assists in preparation for future, catastrophic losses to reduce that impact. That's really what we're doing when we're talking about crisis management. And really the goal is to save lives, and to continue critical operations. But if we can't save lives, how can we continue any operations? And also part of that process, the goal is to return to normal as soon as possible. So that's what the crisis management process is about. There are three phases of a crisis. But first, I want to tell you that, all types of entities are impacted by a crisis. Counties are impacted, school districts are impacted, cities, the federal government. And in this last pandemic, even other countries were involved. Many private businesses would also be involved with a crisis, especially if they're doing business with a county or another public entity that has to provide, vendors or IT services from my private industry, and the whole chain of vendors through the supply chain can be affected. And also it could affect just the entities, but if people, it's going to affect your employees in that entity. The first phase, there are three phases to a crisis. The first phase are threats. And as we saw earlier in the picture, threats have evolved over the years. Primary focus at the beginning was to prevent property damage from hurricanes and windstorms and things like that. Then, like I said, we became to get tougher, and active shooter scenarios started to happen, and lives were being lost. And now even cyber attacks. And now we have, like I said, the emerging threats of the pandemic. What threats are we going to face in the future? What have we not thought about? Here, I want you to think about some possible threats that have happened in your area. Maybe what threats have happened more frequently in your area? What threats have been more severe in your area? What threats would be possible in your area? I just wanted to start thinking about that because we will use that information in an exercise a little bit further down. The second phase of a threat are warnings. These are warning systems, and they're all types. So the federal government has some warning systems. The state, the cities, counties, school districts have warning systems. Of course, the TV, news outlets put out warning systems. But I like to watch the Weather Channel, and I know they always put out a warning system. They have a 5-tier warning system that's color-coded with, different colors, with red being the highest threat, and it goes from marginal to high, levels. And so they put out warning system also. Also, you've noticed the more common ones, like for hurricanes, there's a warning system. They're categorized through 1 through 5. And it's all based on previous impact of other hurricanes. So category 1 being the less impact, while category 5 being the toughest impact or more catastrophic impact that it will happen out there. I want to consider, what type of warning systems does your county have? Do y'all have maybe panic buttons in some of the offices to warn the sheriffs of maybe a possible active shooter? I know that in Crane County, they have sirens for when there's a hurricane coming, and you can hear the sirens in the city when they go out. So those are some types of warning systems. Just be aware of the warning systems in your area so you can use them when there is a threat. And then the third phase of a crisis is the actual impact. And you know what? There's always a human impact. People are going to get affected by a crisis. It affects employees, vendors, customers, citizens, families. You know what? It's definitely going to affect county business operations. A crisis is going to, may warrant shutdowns. It's going to warrant furloughs and maybe even layoffs of many employees. Also, it's going to affect the impact is going to affect your courthouse, your facilities. Are they going to be safe to work in? Are they going to be there, or are they going to be destroyed because of a crisis? Also, one thing you got to consider is your budget. Your budget's going to be impacted because there's going to be extra increased expenditures before, during, and after impact of a crisis. Also, as we saw, go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt and give the first auditor keyword. It is
keyword
cactus. Okay, carry on.
Good. Thank you. We were talking about what areas are you going to be impacted when it hits. It's also, we noticed like this past year, it impacted county revenue because people were not able to pay taxes. Different departments were closed, so revenue was not being able to be collected. So, you know, it's going to affect your taxpayers. They might not be able to pay either because of a crisis, you know. And even some people, some lives may be lost, and there's going to be extra costs for the county. You know what? One cost that we need to think about that has also is your reputational impact and how you handle a crisis. You know, you can get a negative publicity from the media on how you handle the crisis, and this can affect your long-term goals, you know, out there. So what areas, I want you to consider what other areas can be impacted by a crisis, because these are areas that we're going to need to consider to reduce the impact. You know what? Also, threats occur concurrently, sometimes by themselves, and you know what? Their impacts are interchangeable. You know, a county can be going through a cyber attack at the same time they're going through a pandemic. At the same time, maybe you're in a place where they had riots and you're getting physical, your buildings are being torn up. So all those different events, concurrent events, impacts different departments. And of course, you know, there's always going to be a human impact, you know, shortfalls of a person not being able to go to work because the courthouse is closed. It's going to affect them. It's going to affect county money, revenue. So planning ahead and being prepared using the crisis management plan is the best way to reduce the impact of these threats. So let's go into the crisis management. Before I go to talk to you about the crisis management process, I do want to compare it because it's similar to the risk management process. And we've discussed the risk management process at other trainings and also at our county management risk conference. And so I want to just go over some of the similarities, like on the crisis management process. Planning is the first step, which is really the same step as the risk management process, where we identify possible threats and hazards that may be hit your entity. This is one of the most important steps because if you cannot identify the threats or the hazards, you can't do anything about them. So the second step of the crisis management is preparedness, and it includes analysis. And in both steps, you know, on the risk management process, the second step is analysis. So one of the things, basic standards to measure when we're analyzing is frequency and severity. How frequent has this threat occurred? How frequent has this type of accident occurred? You know, how severe was the accident? Has the county had fatalities before on work, or because of a crisis, has there been fatalities? How many? How severe? Maybe these are areas you want to start looking at. Also, consider digging in once you find, you know, threats that have, you know, happened in your area. You know, find out a little bit more about them. Maybe look a little deeper what other areas were affected. Step 3 of the crisis management process is prevention. And prevention is a control technique, which is step 3 of the risk management process. And this is where we evaluate and we evaluate what type of control techniques can we use. For example, you can use training to try to prevent mitigate some of the risk. You can also use personal protective equipment. You can use other items for control. But in both areas, you're trying to identify techniques to lessen the impact of a crisis. On step 4, both steps are similar. But you know what? I do want to mention that on step 4, they're both. In step 4 is part of the response, but part of the response is to actually look at your finances, do a financial analysis, because there will be extra expenses that occur during a crisis. You might want to obtain your building schedules. Excuse me, let me return. Excuse me 1 second. I think I went ahead too far. Okay, right here we go. So yes, we're back to the response, and you do a financial analysis. You might want to have to pay some deductibles because of damage to your property and things like that. So you might want to put some budget allocations for deductibles and retentions that may occur. Also, once you get your property schedules, you can get it from your with those that have your coverages with TAC, your member service rep, to find out what autos you currently have covered and what buildings you currently have covered. So you can find these as part of when you do response. And the last step is recovery, which is similar to administer, because this is when we actually start implementing some of the risk control techniques that we've identified on step 3 and started to use these and implement them here. We start to monitor it also, make sure that once we do implement some of the risk control techniques that we monitor these to make sure they're effective. And if they're not effective, this is when we need to make changes in part of the recovery step, which is, like I said, similar to the administer step. I do want to mention that the risk management process is used by the TAC risk control consultants to implement an accident prevention plan at counties. This plan gives guidance on ongoing daily risk control efforts for the county. One good idea to do to make it to make this work has to be accountability. So one good practice is to assign people to each of the steps and each of the tasks of these processes. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and go straight into the planning process of the of the crisis management process. Now here we'll be talking more of the crisis management process, which is different because this deals with more catastrophic losses. This is not going to allow you to continue your normal operations. More people are going to be affected. All levels of your entity are going to be affected, and also other entities are going to be affected. So the crisis management plan is more for catastrophic type of losses. And of course, this is where we identify the threats, like I mentioned earlier. One thing that you do want to identify that's different from the risk management process is your critical operations, because this is maybe one of the few things that the county will be able to, or your entity will be able to continue. And in order to be able to operate those critical operations, you also need to, have essential employees that perform those operations. Do you have the resources available to perform those operations? You might want to start with a risk assessment of your current status to see what you currently have. Identify the resources that are available versus the ones you're going to need. Also, you might want to look at part of this is for critical operations. Are they dependent on other parties, private industry, to do that operation? Is it a third-party IT vendor that you need to work with, or vendors of supplies? What plans are currently being employed at your county or at your entity right now? Most counties have an emergency management plan. Is that up to date? Are y'all using it? Also, many of our counties have implemented an accident prevention plan and have been awarded awards for this for implementing this plan? Also, do you have a disaster recovery plan that's being used? Is TAC helping you for this planning? Some additional steps that you may need to part of your crisis management process is to have a crisis management team, and the team should include all departments and employees from all levels of your organization. You need to also have an established, delegate authority and have a chain of command. So it does need to be organized. You need to establish priorities as a team. And then one of the teams, the most important is saving lives. And most important thing is saving lives so we can continue operations also, So part of the planning, this is where I do have 2 exercises that we're going to work on to practice the planning process. And the first exercise, we call it a threat correlation chart. And mainly it's just to identify the risk level of several threats. As you can see, the chart goes severity on your left side. How severe is it? Was it a fatality? Was it a near miss? So we have from slight being the lowest to high. And then frequency, how often does that happen? Again, almost never, slight to high. And this would be the time if you had thought about some threats before, you can just chart them at this time to give you an idea of maybe what threats to start focusing on. So if you could take a minute and maybe send something through chat to maybe give us an idea of what type of threats happen in your area, maybe send a thread and what county, and that way gives us an idea of what we're talking about. Like, for example, in Travis County that I live in, I would consider a tornado a very slight frequency. So they would be at the slight frequency, but we haven't had many tornadoes in Austin, but when we've had the damage has been moderate. So I would put a dot on that square where you intersect slight and moderate for a tornado in Travis County. Anybody want to send one of theirs in? Any ideas? Flooding, all right. Orange County, send some information in flooding, Kendall County. So maybe, those are threats that you probably are well prepared for. But how about start thinking of some others that maybe haven't happened as often or you're not as well prepared for? This exercise, you could copy that page and have several copies and write it down for several threats and have it on separate pages so maybe you could work on prevention techniques and control techniques separately for each threat. So that's what we would call the threat correlation chart based on severity and frequency. I see also flooding, hurricanes, flood, fire, cyber attacks are some of the threats that we have out there. If you can think of some upcoming ones, something we haven't thought about, that would be a good time to put it on this exercise.
Victor, I'm going to chime in with our second keyword while everyone is taking some time to type. Our second keyword is candle, C-A-N-D-L-E, candle.
We have more threats coming up, tornadoes. We have train derailment. Oh, in Midland, I think they had, was that Midland, the train derailment, I think? Yeah. So those are threats that we can start preparing for right now. Let's go to exercise number 2. And again, this is all part of the planning process. We're still on step 1. And this is exercise 2, continuity of operations. And actually, it should say critical operations. You want to identify for your department, those that are attending here today, for your department, what are some critical operations that you do have to do daily, then weekly, and then monthly. So you can identify these, and then what essential staff can do this critical operations? You have your primary, do you have a backup for those? This would be a good time to maybe start identifying some of those backups, and also what are the critical resources needed? What do you have available? Do you have backups? So if you can at least think of one critical operation for your department at this time, that would help this process. And then what we could do as an entity together, or a county altogether, is gather some of these forms from different departments, and we can start preparing for a crisis and continue these operations that were identified by different departments. So again, you could make several copies of this page here, give it to different departments, and like I said, gather it all together and come up with at least being able to identify these critical operations. What staff is it going to take to do it, and what resources will I need to do these critical operations? So hopefully, like I said, you've written down at least one critical operation for your department. I'm going to move into the second step of the crisis management process, and that's preparedness. This step is really important. This is where you do a lot of analysis of those possible threats that you identified on exercise 1 and exercise 2, the critical operations. And here, you're going to prioritize, the prevention techniques that you're going to use. It's going to be dependent on the risk level that you identified on exercise 1. Some other components of preparedness, and we'll go through some of these more in depth later, but some of the components that include in this component of preparedness is educating the people, your employees, and equipping the personnel with the right equipment, the right resources to get the job done, either for prevention or with the control prevention techniques. Maybe having drills, exercise drills for evacuating a building, testing, your IT, doing a penetration test on your cyber to see if you can be attacked. And of course, you have to measure these results. And if things are not working, revise it and find a different technique. Have a plan A, plan B, plan C in case something doesn't go well. This would be a good time to prepare for this, to analyze this, and to plan for this. Also, one thing that you do have to consider is your budget. It's going to affect the budget. So are you going to have money to implement some of the items for your crisis management plan? You might have to budget for that. For reserves, have some reserves for additional equipment, or you might have to go to rent a different building and items like that. And definitely between part of the preparedness, you do start to need to communicate that you are working on a crisis management plan. You need to talk to the people internally that you're working with, and externally, maybe with vendors and other entities that may be affected with the crisis that hits your county. So you need communication. Start communicating with others about the plan and why you're doing it. Start to have positive interactions, with the media. Build good relationships with the media before the crisis hits, and inform them of what you're doing to try to reduce this impact. Like I said, this step of preparedness is very important and really makes the way for the next 3 steps. So this is a step where you'll want to take more time on the preparedness. The next step is the prevention. Prevention, reduction, separation, transfer, avoidance, and a combination, those are all control techniques, risk control techniques. One of the techniques that I saw very prevalent during the pandemic was avoidance. It told you to avoid public gatherings, large public gatherings, avoid touching your face, avoid visiting the elderly, avoid traveling. So you can see, And why I'm mentioning that technique because I had not seen it used as much in previous times as this past during the pandemic. Like I say, there are many other control techniques that can be used this is where you will start applying these. Also, one good technique is to have backups for all your resources, including your people, your property, and your revenue, your money. Be proactive. You know, one of the things you're going to use for or prioritize is protecting lives, and then safeguarding your premises and property. You can use the TAC accident prevention plan, and our claims department has a catastrophic preparation and response plan, which you can use for guidance to identify control techniques that you can implement. So this will give you ideas of what type of risk control techniques and things to use, because we've already listed some of these items. And like I said, those counties that are using the accident prevention plan, you are using this already. You just need to take it to the higher level to catastrophic losses. The next step of the risk management, of the crisis management process is response. I guess one of the things you want to start with when a response is to do a damage assessment, you know, and to determine losses by department and identify which needs are first, you know, which are the highest needs. Also here, you might want to get your auto and schedules from your carrier or from your MSR, member service rep with TAG, to identify vehicles might have disappeared if there was a tornado and not there no more, and at least you'll know which ones are missing. Same thing with your, you know, building and content schedule. You can get it from your member service rep to identify buildings they might see what type of damage, be able to identify them, locate them, see where they used to be if they're gone. Also, once these are catastrophic type of losses. There, you know, usually the state has a control and command center. You want to, and even the county will have a control and command center. You want to coordinate your response effort with them to make sure you're not getting in the way of each other. Like I say, coordinate your responses with your state and federal authorities. There will be a chain of command, which you had in your planning stage for your crisis management team. So follow the chain of command. And of course, this is also a time you might want to start looking for additional financial resources during disasters. There's usually some type of federal disaster recovery funds available from the government. And also there's some state and local funding available after a disaster. So this would be the time to also start applying or finding those and applying for those. And again, the communication. You have to proactively communicate internally and externally with employees, customers, the general public, and definitely the media. I do want to mention a coverage that for those of you that are members of the TAC risk management pool, under our general liability coverage, we do have some crisis management coverage, which provides you coverage to hire a crisis management team to help with public relations and items like that. So you could probably file a claim with us on that for assistance on public relations. Again, communications with the media during this time is very important. Actually, communication with everybody. So this would be one of the prevalent items for your response is communicating throughout the whole process. The final step of the process is recovery. And this is following the recovery. You know, it becomes easy because you've planned for this, you prepared for this, you've already identified control techniques, these have already been implemented. So really, you're just following and just kind of monitoring your implemented crisis management plan, or also your local emergency management plan. There's a lot of drills, like I know over by the coastal counties, they've had drills. They know things like that the emergency management coordinator has exercises before. Again, TAC has the risk management pool has a catastrophic and preparedness and response plan. It's available for, controls on to look at for your property exposures, for damages to properties. I mentioned the crisis management coverage, also in their general liability. And again, this process, your crisis management process, should have already written down and tell you and to give you guidance who will do what, when, and how when a crisis impacts. Also, part of the recovery process, don't secure and control access to all your sites, to all your locations. Again, continue to initiate communications with the local media, the public, your customers, your employees. And, main of all, best right here is going to be to maintain a positive media relationship throughout this process. This is the time also where you'll file claims with your carriers. And also with TAC, once you file a claim, you have a team of claims examiners that will help you with the recovery efforts. So yes, contact them and ask them for help. They'll be there to help you. Apply for your disaster relief funds from the state, federal, and local governments. And again, continue to monitor your plan. And if something's not working, revise it so it does become effective. So those are the 5 steps of the crisis management plan. Like I said, there's all types of plans. There are many types of catastrophic threats that hit counties. I've talked about a little bit about the accident prevention plan, the catastrophic preparation, the emergency management plan, the risk management plan. But all these plans help to build your bigger crisis management plan. I have a personal development author, Alan Lackland, once said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So really the best plan is to prepare and plan ahead before a crisis hits using the crisis management plan. Like I said, the main goals for this plan is to save lives, continue critical operations, and to return to normal as soon as possible. This is your risk management consultants from TAC, the different regions. Call them for help in this area. We've all are knowledgeable about crisis management process, so we can help you with your plan. Thank you. Any questions from anybody? What y'all think?
Victor, I have the final keyword.
Okay.
Is cash. It's cash, C-A-S-H, cash. If you are keeping track of those, that is the final. And I am also going to be, hold on a second, I got to take the reins back from you.
Sure.
And I am going to bring over our file transfer pod that we had at the beginning that had a bunch of those documents that you mentioned in. So it'll take me a second to bring everything up if you want to continue on.
Thank you. No. So hopefully this will help to complement the plans that you already have at your county. Like I said, tech consultants are there to help in this area. We're already trying to identify new threats for the future. We're planning to continue teaching this type of courses at regional trainings at your county. For those in my area, if you'd like me to do this presentation for your county, if we cannot do it live, we could do it through a WebEx meeting, and just to get everybody. Or is there a specific section you would like to go more in depth of some of those steps? We can do that also. Go just handle certain steps. So let us know how we can help you. Like I said, you have a whole team of consultants and claims examiners and other staff that can help in this area.
Okay, so you should be seeing, if you are able to see the file transfer pod, you should be seeing it on your screen right now. There are 5 forms that are all PDFs. The first is the clerk CE form. Next is a CE form for anybody else. There is a crisis management white paper and threat correlation chart and continuity of operations chart. And again, in order to download any of these files, you just highlight the file name and right-click, and it should allow you to download. It should pop up a dialog box for you to be able to download those. And again, the threat correlation chart and the continuity of operations chart you can use anytime. The CE form, if you will send it to me or tacrcs@county.org once you have filled that out. If you would like CE credits, please do that in the next couple of days would be great. And I believe that's it from me. Victor, did you have anything else that you wanted to?
No, that's it. Thank you for attending. I appreciate it, and hopefully we can come visit y'all soon.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.